Welcome everyone to this first episode of the webinar series on generative AI for development in HPC. My name is Nicolas Herman. I'm a coordinator at EuroCC Belgium. And Geert-Jan Becks, also part of the project, will present the webinars. And these webinars will mainly featured a recorded demonstration of using generative AI. And this first episode focused on maximizing search tool usage and getting help on the command line. And there is also a dedicated Q&A channel in the Teams meeting here, where you can ask questions, and some of them will be answered after the session. And before getting started, I will explain in a few sentences who we are, because you saw EuroCC Belgium, but maybe you don't know who we are. So EuroCC Belgium is a part of the EuroCC project, and it's funded by EuroHPC GU and the European Union. And the project aims to enhance Belgium's national competence in high-performance computing, and it also seeks to promote and facilitate the use of HPC, but also high-performance data analysis and AI in Belgium. And our focus is on collaboration, resource sharing, and compiling HPC training opportunities to help individuals and groups acquire the necessary skills. And we aim to encourage companies and public administration, and especially SMEs, to adopt HPC technologies to enhance productivity, competitiveness, and efficiency. And this involves also communication and awareness raising about HPC. So I saw someone who raised our hands. You can use the conversation and the Q&A if you want to interact. And at the end of the webinar, I can allow some of them to use their microphone to answer some question, and maybe have a small discussion at the end of the webinar. So now let's get started with the AI-powered search. So this tools allows you to formulate much more sophisticated queries and get answers. And the tool used here will be ChatGPT. So let's getting started.
When you log into ChatGPT, the first thing you see is a question. What can I help with? And indeed, it's a good question. ChatGPT is used for quite a number of things, and I'd like to discuss some of them, which I do with ChatGPT, and that really help me as a developer on the one hand, and as an HPC user on the other hand. So this will be a little introduction of how I use ChatGPT in order to find information which helps me professionally. A term that will crop up time and again when discussing large language models such as ChatGPT is context. Context is really important because it will improve the quality of the answers you get from a chatbot. And so that's also why, next to my professional account, which you're seeing here, I also have a private account. So in my private account, I ask questions about music, about history, about travel, and so on. And since ChatGPT in fact remembers your previous questions and learns things about you, this would actually influence the answers I'd get about to questions about professional issues. So that's why I have two separate accounts, this one for private purposes, the other for professional purposes. And here, for example, I was asking about music. I was interested in the range of the human voice, and specifically about the contratenor. So I asked what the typical range of human voices is, and basically I got an interesting list of voice types and their specific ranges. But as I already mentioned, actually I wanted to know about the contratenor. So that's one important thing with chatbots. If you don't get the answer you're looking for, simply keep on asking questions and give more relevant details. And then basically, when I asked specifically about the contratenor, I actually got the answer I was looking for. However, asking about music and travel and whatever is nice, but again, ChatGPT learns from your queries, it learns about you, so it would, again, influence the results which I get professionally, and that's something that I prefer not to happen. There is another difference. The account I use for private purposes is a free account. That's the free plan which OpenAI offers, while my professional account is in fact a paid account. So basically I've subscribed to one of their professional plans. And that opens up a number of additional possibilities. First and foremost, you get access to more powerful models. So that's of course very relevant when you're using this professionally. And also there are another couple of features which I will mention later on as well. So of course that means that whatever you see here is not for free and it's a paid service. So that is something that you have to keep in mind. There is a budget required to use this. One of the ways to provide context to ChatGPT is by configuring it. So you can customize it to quite some degree, and one of the things you can do is have custom instructions. So basically that is a summary of what you would like ChatGPT to know about you in order to fine-tune its responses. So I give a bit description about what I do professionally, what my education is, etc., etc. So this is information that can be shared with plugins for ChatGPT. It can also be used in order to improve the performance of the models. So bear in mind that everything you share with ChatGPT in this dialogue may actually be used by it in order to retrain models and may fall into the hands of people who create plugins. So be a bit careful here. Also, when you do this the first time, this configuration, ChatGPT will actually tell you that this is the case, and you agree to that, or you can opt out, so that this information cannot be reused for any purpose at all, except for improving your queries. Another way in which you can customize ChatGPT is by specifying how you would like it to respond. So basically you could mention that you prefer brief answers, or on the contrary, that you prefer more examples, that you prefer lengthy response, a reasoned response. Typically I leave this blank because I prefer to give that information for each and every specific query. So for me, and this is not particularly useful. However, it's a good default setting if you want that. And then there is the capabilities which ChatGPT will enable. Basically, whatever you like, you can check here. So we can of course ask ChatGPT questions. For instance, suppose that I'm writing a Python application and I'd like to handle command line arguments. And there are quite a number of libraries to do that, but I would like to know which features are supported by which library, and overall which would be the best recommendation. So I can ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT starts to generate an answer, starting with argparse, usual suspect. It indeed lists pros and cons and gives some recommendation what it would be best for. Then it continues with click, and so on. I'm very curious what at the end of the day its final recommendation will be. There are quite a number of these libraries which in fact I've never heard of, so I'm learning something here. Okay, so basically the overall recommendation is argparse for normal projects, let's put it that way, and better development and so on, you'd go for Click or Typer, and for large-scale CLI project, Cliff would be the best. Now typically I'm not doing large-scale CLI projects, I just need to parse some command line arguments, so that probably would make Cliff less interesting for me. Now I do know argparse and Click, but I've no idea about Typer. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT for an example of Typer. And I get a code fragment. Takes a while to generate. And here's an example. So basically it is based on annotations, function annotations, decoration, and then it shows me that I can actually ask for help and that I can provide various commands to the application. Now this is not exactly what I had in mind, because this is really for a CLI application rather than handling command arguments per se. So I'd have to refine my query a little bit, because apparently ChatGPT has given me some advice which is useful, but which is not exactly what I'm looking for. And here's another example, which indeed is likely more what I want. And it proceeds with some argumentation of why I would potentially want to use Typer for that. But let's verify that this is indeed what I was looking for. So, not quite, because frankly I prefer named arguments, named command line arguments. And indeed, it seems to be the case that Typer actually can handle this as well. Although I'm not yet convinced that I would be using the Typer library, it illustrates nicely how ChatGPT actually allows you to do rather sophisticated queries, in the sense that you get an answer which actually doesn't answer your question, well, the question you would want that to be answered, and you can refine your question, go into a conversation with ChatGPT in order to improve the answer and to tailor it to your personal needs. Now, one of the things I would recommend is to verify the answer. So basically, if I were, say, convinced that I wanted to start using Typer, And now proceed to the documentation and check its feature list more thoroughly, but to get a first impression, and this is really a nice way to go. To illustrate the importance of checking your results, I was recently looking into Nextflow. That is a workflow system that's primarily used in bioinformatics, but you can use it for any type of workload. So I was a little bit annoyed by the Nextflow syntax in the sense that you define processes, and one of the things that you typically need to do, let's see whether it's here, is actually to replicate the name of the output file, in the sense that you specify it as the output path, and then you have to repeat it in the script part. And that is a little bit annoying to me, since this is error prone. So I was looking for an elegant way of solving this by perhaps using variables or whatever. And as you can see, this was quite a conversation with ChatGPT. And one of the things it came up with was a solution I really liked, and that would be this one here. So basically, I define a variable output file, assign the actual file name to it, and then reuse that variable in the script part of the Nextflow process. Okay, I was very happy with this result, and I tried it out, and it pretty horribly failed, because this is not valid syntax in a Nextflow definition. So basically that was nice, but unfortunately also incorrect. So I went back to ChatGPT and mentioned, well, okay, your suggestion is nice, but it doesn't work. And then you get the usual ChatGPT response that you're absolutely correct, etc., etc. And it then gives some correct approaches. And in this particular case, again, it was the previous answer which I didn't like, but then this one is actually not too bad, because you simply define a variable in order to deal with that, and that is an acceptable solution, and that's the one which I, at the end of the day, went for. This is a nice example of a hallucination, because in its training set, ChatGPT will have not that many examples for Nextflow, while on the other hand, for subjects such as programming Python, there will be lots and lots of examples, because there is much more of that type of code out there. So that's always something to be aware of when you are querying on subjects that are, let's say, less mainstream. The risk of getting an answer that is actually an hallucination is quite a bit higher. When you want to chat about a new subject, it's always good practice to start a new chat, so that your context is actually fresh, and that you can, without any influence of, let's say, the queries you did before, your previous conversation, start over asking questions. So another feature which is nice in ChatGPT is that you can actually group queries into projects. And that's of course a way to organize your work. In this particular case, I have a project on Nextflow, and I also have another project on Python type hints. So it's a nice way of grouping things. The last thing I want to show is AI-powered web search. So I have the following query, and I switch on search the web to do my query. This will give me two things. First, the information being used is going to be relevant, timely, but also I will get attribution. So basically I will get a list of the websites that ChatGPT used in order to retrieve the answer. So this would be the actual response to my query, essentially using rsync. with the --delete option in order to keep both directories in sync in the case that the local directory contains less files than the remote directory. So basically that seems to be quite a good answer. It also goes into details about setting up and even a cron job in order to automate this process. So that's quite interesting. However, I also get the sources. Sorry about that, this is in Dutch for whatever reason, but basically that allows me to check the actual web pages on which ChatGPT found the information which is relevant in order to structure this information. So this gives you more control, a way to check the results ChatGPT comes up with.
So it was it for the power search part. Then we have some demonstration about getting helps on the command line with ShellGPT and GitHub Copilot. So here we go for those demonstrations about getting help on the command line.
Sometimes it's more convenient to have command line access to a tool like ChatGPT rather than having to switch to a web browser, asking your query, copying the result and going back to your terminal. So it's quite possible to do that. There is a very nice application which is called ShellGPT, and that allows you to query from the command line. For instance, in this particular query here, how do I compress all files in a directory which is called output into a gzip archive? So I immediately get the correct command with the option to compress the output, the Z option. It's even more convenient because you can actually issue the command and specify that you may want to have it executed with the -E option. So you get the command which you can execute, and you either execute by hitting return or can cancel that by hitting N. So that's really convenient and quite a time saver when compared with using a web browser. As another example, suppose you need to know how to install a Debian package on Ubuntu. So you immediately get the correct answer. It needs to be done as root, so there is sudo. Then the dpackage utility is used with the -I option to install a package. So again, you get a concise and precise answer with very little effort. The two previous examples use the sh subcommand to specifically ask questions about shell commands. However, you can also ask questions about code, and for this you need the code subcommand. In this example, I want to know how to include OpenMP into the build process of an application when I'm using CMake as a build system. So when I execute the query, I get the option which I could set in order to tell the compiler to generate code for OpenMP. However, this is a little bit old style, and also it's specific to the GNU compiler series. So there should be a better answer here. The model I've been using up to this point is GPT 3.5. So if I specify a more powerful model, such as GPT 4.0 for the query, then I get a different result, and that actually gives me a minimal example of a CMake file in order to CMake lists file in order to define my project, and it also uses the find package function of CMake in order to nicely ensure that linking is done and compiling is done using OpenMP flags. Note though that this is not for free. You need an API key from OpenAI, and you need to prepay for queries you intend to do. So that goes both for the more sophisticated GPT 4.0 model, but also for the 3.5 model, which via the web interface you can use for free. As an alternative, you can use GitHub Copilot on the command line. So there is a subcommand which you can install, Copilot, and that allows you to query GitHub Copilot from the command line. So this is the same example as for ChatGPT with ShellGPT. And in this case, you see that after a while, you get the same command and some explanation about it. So that's a good alternative for those of you who are in academics, because you typically do have access to GitHub's academic program and also access to GitHub Copilot.
So thank you for joining us. We will quickly answer about Q&A about those topics. I saw some interesting questions in the chat. So I just have to recall that the EuroCC project is funded by European Union and EuroHPC GU. And if I think that Gertjan is here and he can open his microphone if he would answer some of the questions in the chat. And if you want to stay in touch with EuroCC Belgium, you can join us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, or visit our website and subscribe to our newsletter.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Indeed, there are quite a number of interesting questions in the chat, but maybe the first one is for you. So it is, will the slide deck be made available and the recording? And maybe you can also say how you intend to do that.
Yes, absolutely. So the recording of the meeting will be available probably on YouTube or another streaming mean, and it will be fully available after the webinar series.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Then the next question is about DeepSeek. So is DeepSeek better or worse than ChatGPT at this point in time? Basically, my answer is that it's an arms race. So there are quite a number of very high quality models out there. The ones of OpenAI are, of course, quite famous, but there are also models by Meta, by Amazon, and by other players in the field, and now, of course, also DeepSeek. So I would say that many of them are more or less equivalent in features and in accuracy. So at some point, I decided, okay, I'm going for a paid service. And I chose at that point in time ChatGPT. And I'm just sticking with that because switching all the time is probably not the best strategy for me. But then again, your mileage may vary. DeepSeek is quite interesting, definitely. The question is, do you want to send your data there? And I leave that for you to decide. So that is also a consideration when choosing an online service. We will talk briefly about hosting your own models in the last episode of this webinar series, so that might be an interesting alternative as well. With respect to the content, to the context and how long it is retained, so typically the context you offer is being used in a conversation, in a chat conversation, and that retains, will be retained in the course of that conversation. Again, depending on the specific model and its parameters, that context window may be a bit shorter or a bit larger. So typically for models like ChatGPT 4.0, that context window is quite large. For small language models or for ChatGPT 3.5, it might be a bit less. So how long the history of your conversation is retained as a function of the length of the conversation is, yeah, not really quite clear. Let's put it that way. One of the features which I didn't mention about projects in ChatGPT is that if you group conversations in projects, all those conversations can be used as context for follow-up conversations in that same project. So that's an interesting feature, which is actually relatively new, since the whole concept of projects in ChatGPT is relatively new. With respect to context and context manipulation, again, in the last webinar of this series, we'll talk a little bit about retrieval augmented generation, so RAG, and that is a different approach to providing context. So that's also an interesting idea. Then there is a question whether the paid plan of ChatGPT is worth it for a PhD student. It's a hard question. It depends on who is paying for it. So if your university is paying for it, I'd say definitely yes. At the end of the day, it's not that expensive. If you have to pay for it personally, then of course it's a personal decision. And yeah, it's hard to give you real good advice on that. If I compare the quality of the answers of ChatGPT 4 families of models with ChatGPT 3.5, the difference is significant, really significant. So that's why for professional purposes, I opted to use a paid plan. And I think that translates to other service providers as well, that typically their paid offerings are significantly better in quality than what they offer for free. Again, DeepSeek might be an option, but yeah, do you want to send your data there? Okay. Does ShellGPT rely on OpenAI? Good question whether it works with a local, with a locally hosted model. I didn't try that, to be honest. The reason I didn't try it was that typically if you use, for instance, Olama in order to host your local model, it comes with a CLI anyway. So in that respect, except for the execute query thing, there isn't that much benefit in using a ShellGPT with a local model. But it's an interesting question. I'd have to figure it out. I didn't look into that. And now for some reason, okay, I need to close this. Sorry, I lost track of the questions. Okay, got them back. Why? Okay, something weird is happening to my interface to Teams, but okay, let's try. Most likely, I would say yes. Again, I didn't experiment too much with other services. Again, it's the argument of the weapons race. So essentially, at some point, a certain service will be better, and then it will be overtaken by another one to get better then again, etc., etc. So that's why I don't shop around that much, to be honest. I would have to check which models ShellGPT can actually deal with. I don't know, but you would find that in the documentation as well. Would EuroCC have an initiative to host European models? So I know that there are in recent EuroHPC joint undertaking calls for compute project that there are quite a few European models being trained. So whether the result of that effort is going to be hosted as a service by EuroCC is, as far as I know, at least still up in the air. But I could imagine that if not by EuroCC, then at least by EuroCC joint undertaking or by the European AI initiative, that is definitely in the cards. But under which conditions, whether that would be free for all or a paid service, etc., I frankly have no idea. Perhaps that Nicola has some insight in that, but frankly, I don't at this point, at least.
Yeah, about the European initiative about AI, we can, for example, mention AI factories also, but it's more to use some infrastructure to run AI models than hosting a real European model.
Then there is one more sub-question somewhere. Cost of personal payment. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think I understand the question. So basically, well, suppose you have to host your own model, or you have to pay for a personal usage of, for instance, OpenAI. Well, of course, if you pay OpenAI, you can actually use the full model, the full blown 100 billion parameter model. To host that yourself is going to be very expensive. So typically what you can relatively easily host is small language models, such as, for instance, the 3 or the 7 or the, with some luck, slightly more billion parameter models from Meta, from DeepSeek, and so on. But if you want to host larger models, it's going to get very expensive. The problem is, of course, memory. So you need quite some memory on your GPUs in order to host such a model, and you will need multiple GPUs in order to do that distributedly. If you don't do that, you're stuck with the bandwidth from GPU to host memory. That is PCI Express, and that is slow. So that would yield unacceptable latencies in responses. So hosting it yourself is very expensive. If you're happy with a small language model, and they're not that bad, don't get me wrong. So for instance, a Code Llama can give you very acceptable answers for coding questions. I've experimented with those and they're quite good. And that is relatively easy to host. You need a decent GPU, but it can be a consumer level GPU, such as a NVIDIA RTX card. It does that comfortably.
And we received also some questions in the classical conversation. There is one about the context between chats. Does the context transfers between chats in ChatGPT or not?
So basically, but it depends. You can switch that on, but typically not that much. So basically, the information about yourself is typically configured. But if you want information transfer between conversations, you'd have to group them in a project. Then that will happen. So that's an opt-in, of course. You don't have to use project, but if you want that feature, then projects are the way to go.
Okay, and we have also two questions about ShellGPT. Is ChatGPT can be used locally or not?
Well, basically ChatGPT, so the OpenAI models are very large, as I already mentioned, and they're not open source. So essentially hosting ChatGPT yourself is not an option because the model is simply not available. You can host other models. As I already mentioned, Meta has quite a number of models ranging from small, it's to say 3 billion parameters, 7 billion parameters, 70 billion parameters. Those you can host locally. They are also open source. You have to sign a license agreement, but okay, apart from that, you can use them, you can host them. That's not an issue. But models that OpenAI trains are not open source. So you can only have access to those either via the web interface or via API calls, for which again, for the API calls, you definitely have to pay. So that is something that you really have to keep in mind. Hosting your own ChatGPT, if we are talking ChatGPT OpenAI, is not an option.
Yeah, and the other question was, is the paid account mandatory for installing ShellGPT? But yes, this is the case you answered.
Yeah, exactly.
And there is a last question about the Pro subscription versus the Plus subscription.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any, is it much better or not? It was the question.
The Plus subscription, okay. Yeah, well, the Plus subscription is well, okay, let me, because I'm not quite confident that I have the names of the plans right. So there is a paid plan of, and we're talking OpenAI now, of $20 a month, and another paid plan of $200 a month. Frankly, I never tried, and I'm not planning to try the $200 per month plan, because I don't think that would pay off. And I'm not even willing to try. For that amount of money, I'm not going to try. That doesn't answer your question, but it at least gives you my perspective on it.
Yeah, and by checking, I think that the Pro subscription, $200 a month, is like an unlimited access to everything. But the model, maybe they try some model for those subscribers, but the model seems to be quite similar.
Yeah, what you also get, they claim, is early access to new models and so on. That's great, but then again, it's a weapons race, so no, I'm never ever going to pay $200 a month for that. It's taxpayers' money, so I have to be slightly responsible at times. So $20 a month I find justified. $200 a month, no, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you very much, Geert-Jan. I think we managed to tackle most of the questions of the audience. And thank you everyone for joining us today. The next session is already tomorrow, so I hope that some of you will be joining tomorrow to speak about let AI write the boilerplate code. So see you tomorrow for those who subscribe to the next session.
Thanks all, and see you tomorrow.